mechanical principles of scrolling, bending, folding, kind of all the same construct. The basic idea is you're trying to find a way to isolate your energy to create a bend where you want it. How do you create that fulcrum that you want? And obviously one of the easiest ways to create a fulcrum would be, say, lock it in the vise, give it a good whack if you're trying to create like a 90 degrees bend, or maybe use a fork and horns. And the fork and horns one is pretty good because what you're looking at is a way to grab a hold of it, lock it in, and then pull it around. But creating fluidity of line with this is very tricky. So that's why, especially in the last video, I kind of touched on the idea that if you're using the hammer to create that curve, especially in the scroll format, you have a piece like this where you have contact here, you have force coming through here, and you're going to create, a turning motion of energy here. That energy is then kind of a weird way to draw it, but I'm going to draw it as a kind of crescent moon. So that's a fade out in the energy. So you get the predominant amount of force and bend happens here, but there is a trailing energy that occurs running through to your point of fulcrum, or your point of contact. And likewise, when you're applying force, you're picking a fulcrum. So on this account, you're going to use the edge of the anvil, and you're putting force down, your body is forced down here. That fulcrum here is going to be your predominant dynamic of force, and then that is going to fade out in each direction, which means when you put a piece of bar here and you whack it, you are not just going to get a kink like this. You are in fact going to get soft bending through here, soft bending through here, and a harder bending at the fulcrum itself. So obviously, if you're trying to create a 90-degree angle, say you're trying to build a square corner or something like that, trying to create that 90-degree angle, what happens as you bend down, this is going to bow up. Okay? I'm going to throw a piece of material in the fire to demonstrate that. A little bit of flat stock will work quite nicely. The other thing that occurs brain lost that thought process completely. What's the other thing that occurred? Oh, the other thing that occurs is that compression and that stretching, right? So depending on how wide and flat your material is, it becomes more and more apparent. Oh, I'll throw another piece of flat stock in the fire for that. Great. So the idea of, actually, I'm going to do this on marks. The idea of the bend is it's a funky one. So if, say, I take marked lengths and I'll center punch it, and we'll go 8 inches and 4 inches. And I'll mark that in 3 positions. So center, bottom, top. And we'll just kind of see what happens with it. I have absolutely no prediction of it, other than this should occur shorter than this. That's what it should be. But we know there is 4 and 8. Course, because in the act of science we are watching it, therefore we have created variance, and Mr. Murphy will occur. Who knows what really will happen. So the first one, I'm just going to take it flat. This is showing I get Jess to move to the side, I'm trying to create a bend at the edge of the anvil, but you're going to see that it curves. There is going to be more dynamic curve at the fulcrum itself, but the whole thing itself curves. And I use the flat stock because the flat stock is more of a noodle and will create more flat curvaceous form than a edged form. Use Paratons for that. Don't be a plonker and burn yourself. So, that's my fulcrum. I'm going to strike out here. See what happens. Right, it bends, so I have to straighten that. I have to apply more force. Notice that my hammer changed angle from that to that. Straighten again. Just kind of keeps that visible. Move my hammer angle to there. Strike in. Strike again. I struck slightly heavy to the left, so I need to strike slightly heavy to the right. So there you can kind of see the dynamic of the force, that it is not something that you can pinpoint. So that's easy enough. Give or take a 90-degree corner, and of course if you wanted to, you could actually upset that end to create a square corner or a built corner. And I'm going to fold that one as well, to kind of express something else. So the laws of this say that for every 90-degree corner you make, you need to add half the material thickness to maintain your center line length, right? So if you have 1 inch wide, for every 90 degrees that you make, and whether that be a curve of a circle, or whether it just be a 90-degree corner, you need to add ½ an inch. So for a full circle, you need to add 2 inches. Right? If, however, you're doing 1/4 inch material, you only add 1/8 of an inch on the corner because it's only half the material thickness. So if I can see my marks, those look about right. And these tongs are horrible for this job. Pick a different one on my next heat. And you'll see how this material is just trying ever so hard to rotate out of plane. That is everything that I expected it to be. Some grip. I'm not really trying to get a particularly tight corner on this. I'm just trying to get a nice, fairly even arc. Controller touch, because whenever you shift out of the linear plane, when you put that force in, what it's trying to do then, you're creating a dynamic in the energy transference into your body. Wait, let me get it in there. Yep, right here, okay. So yeah, if you're out of plane, instead of the energy coming straight up into you and into the tongs or whatever you're holding it with, you're actually then having it out of plane, which will cause rotational forces this way or this way, and you'll start losing energy. And if you're losing energy, you are not being efficient with your material movement. So if you find that it's twisting or kicking, that tells me that you need to realign everything, and that might be just so much as your hammer blow. So your hammer blow might be coming one way or the other. And get that energy realigned so it does transfer into the body smoothly, so that you get more transference of energy into movement in the material. That was a completely confusing trance, right?
Yes.
Yes. Wonderful. Both kind of sort of work, and I think those are useful. Yeah. Great. So I'm going to keep folding this one over. So at this point, that has just basically bent, so you can see those lips on the edge pushing out, okay? And you can see the cupping in the surface and how this has come inwards, right? So that tells me that this has essentially stretched and narrowed, and this is upset and thickened. So if I do that, I have now, if you go back to the upsetting conversation, I've now upset that material in the middle. So that is now permanently changed. If I straighten that back out, I'm going to have a thin spot right there. So I'll do that next. Hopefully that'll help you understand a little bit. All right, back to this one. What was I doing with it? Oh yeah, bending to 90. So it's my center punch marks. So hopefully what we'll find, you can actually see this. So if you look from about here to here in the bend, you can see the whole elongation there. And you can see that this has actually got narrower in that dimension. And it basically starts from the outside to outside of curve. And you can see here, I'm trying not to burn you as I turn up, look at that material thickening. And sure, some of that upsetting is going to have occurred from bumping on the edge of the anvil, but that is also just purely the mechanics of what was happening there. Okay. So we'll take some measurements of that in a second and just kind of see what, hopefully, what happened. We'll show some kind of relationships of what's going on with the material. Let's see if we can get this thing to open up without hammering on it too much. There we go. Might use a soft face hammer to flatten that out. So you get some really interesting things going on with the material as you do open and close things and kind of compress them in. You can also jump them up back this way and create like a square corner formation in there. But you're getting material thickening, you're getting material thinning. It's happening on the inside, it's happening in the crest of the curve, but then what happens at the shoulder of the curve? You know, sometimes you'll actually get build of material on the transition out of the straight. So basically what I'm saying is, as it turns this way, this here will thin, but sometimes you'll get, especially if that's on the downside and you're pulling up, this will actually thicken strangely here at that shoulder through this zone, and then it thickens through here as well. But through there will thin, and then as it comes out, you'll kind of see it. And if any of you remember your physics classes, this is something to do with kind of in the same relation of what was happening with hooks oil. When you start pulling a piece of material and it starts actually stretching out, then it goes into failure. So that kind of stuff. Anyway, I'm going to give this a couple of whacks with a rawhide mallet, try and flatten it out without too much deformation. Maybe that shows something. I'll pull that off. Soap for this. So if you have a look at this from above, pull off that back end a little bit. You'll see some really kind of interesting things have happened here. So look at that swell going sideways. That occurred in the bend, which is the upsetting of the inside of the curve, right? And then here, I don't know if you can really notice it. Might be a case of calipers, but over here we don't really have 1/4 inch. Over here we have maybe even less. Going through this corner, it's kind of back to close to the material thickness, and then over here closer to material thickness. So you can see through this area, kind of necks out and then it thickens out in these corners, and then it thins out in between. So, you know, there are kind of some peculiar things occurring just by creating that bend. And you can see the dynamic, you can actually feel that dynamic of that inner edge that was there. So as we rotate it, maybe we can actually see that little bit of a swell.
Yeah, lay it flat.
Yeah.
You can also definitely see that swell. If you were to lay the ruler across there, you would really see it. Yeah.
And then also you've got that little bit of cupping through here, which is, it's kind of interesting that there's cupping this way and there's cupping this way, which tells me that these corners here and here have built up, or this zone in the middle here has stretched out. Not very scientific, but kind of gives you an idea. The other one is this one, which is that 90-degree bend. And this was just kind of to try and see what happened, mean line, and those kinds of things through it. For nothing else, I can tell you this. Look at that hole there, and it is compressed. This hole hasn't much distorted from the center punch, and this one has stretched. So something must have happened just to get that kind of effect. So they were originally 4 inches each. So if I follow that line, maybe give or take, I've lost, I don't know, 1/8 of an inch maybe on that one. That one I've actually stretched a little bit, about, yeah, if you get your angle down maybe. So here I've compressed an iota. Here I've stretched maybe an iota that comes around that corner, and here I've definitely stretched close to 1/4 inch, right? Which is what I said it would happen. On the external, it should measure half the material. So we've only done 1/4 of the turn, so it's 1/4 of the material. Is that right? Yeah. And then this side should be comparatively similar. So measure that. Hound! Baloo! Come here! So after that minor canine interlude. So I'm going to measure from here on the outer edge all the way around, and as best I can, and all the way. And I'm actually, it's kind of crazy, I'm at 8 7/8, give or take.
Those center punch marks are right there.
And then let's do the internal line, best I can. And again, highly not scientific, but my center punch marks are here. So I'm at, give or take, 7 1/8. And let's try and guesstimate somewhat of a center line, which will be something like that. Look at that. So I've got my center punch there, I'm up at the tip there, and give or take at 8 inches, maybe a little bit over. So, I have some interesting, funky stuff going on there. I don't know what it proves, I don't know what it tells you, but trust the math. it's funny, a lot of the time, you know, we talk about the volumetrics and the calculations for this, that, and the other. Just trust the math. It will do what it's supposed to do. Whenever you make a 90-degree bend, add half material thickness, doesn't matter what it is. When you're trying to put a taper in, use a square taper, do a third of what you're trying to reach, plus a little bit just for the heck of it. And then if you're gonna do a chisel point, half-ish, plus a little bit, because you're never gonna come down to true mathematical zero. But the mathematics doesn't lie. That's all I can say. It might send you down a bit of a weird alleyway sometimes because it doesn't quite give you the results, but remember that you are not a machine and you are not bringing things down to absolute zero. Anyway, that was a little digression. Material loss at corner, we covered that. Material length and picking the right fulcrum, that's a huge one. Obviously, if you want a big soft bend, right, don't go on the razor blade, because all you're going to do is chop a hole in it. Instead, come to a fat radius, because that will ease it. Also, pick points that are apart. Do you think this is a good time for a conversation with the Hosfeld? I think it is. So, I know, just rolling her eyes at so, this is the Hosfeld bender. It is basically a glorified finger breaker. It's what a fork and a horn do. I'm really lazy about my horns. I often just make something that will pop in the vise rather than making tools to go in my hardy hole. But I set this thing up with a lock bolt so I can swing it out of the way. So this thing, the center pin here, you can pull out the center pin. It's got different radii on the tip, or you can use the center pin itself. So you can do that. So grab the other one. Be my joy for today. Make sure the catch stops in there. So, a piece of flat stuff is pretty good for demonstrating this kind of stuff. And if you can, just try to get over it. So, if you look at the distance of the points apart, they're pretty close. Let me even them up, so if I go from there to there, that's now evened. And when I bend on this radius, it should be fairly soft and follow that contour, okay? Easy enough. Now, if I open this distance up, yeah, I'll keep it. Should be good, and I'll do the same over here. And watch how this flexes. It's going to kink here, but it's going to flex throughout this full point, right? So if I want a softer bend, the best way for me to do this is to just bump and bump and bump. Now obviously I can do this also in the throat of the main body, and that will stop. I don't know if you can get a shot of it here, but if I do it in here, it will reduce the likelihood of rotation or helical forms, but you get the idea. All right, so, but look, see how it kinks? It's never truly a smooth curve because the fulcrum is almost too harsh. Now, what does that prove? Not an awful lot, but it's a good thing to think about. If you want to, you can put in, these are actually pipe bending dies, but you can put in supporting dies with curve in them in order to get longer curves and reduce that likelihood of kinking. And for the heck of it, I'm going to show you this setup as well, which is intended to create a harsh kink. So if I pull this back far enough, I can get this piece to really jam. So that's pretty good, it's nice and tight. I don't have much force out. Got a little bit more, there we go. And if I move this pin pretty close, that should be enough. And I could put pushing blocks on there as well, like so if I wanted to, I could throw a flat block in there, which is kind of nice. Especially if I'm doing like really wide work, I could drop that in there and that will keep more of a flat surface push. Get it centered in this rail, because if you don't, you will get into that lower curve and that will cause you problems. But that comes in nicely, and there we go. Good solid 90-degree bend. So, what is this? What does this tell you? Okay, in relation to your anvil, what we've done here is a bend here, relatively soft. This curve is through here, and that harsh one, the easiest way to do it, one line, lock it in a vise, bend it down. Right? Either hammer it down or put an F wrench on it. So you can come in with a wrench. Where did I sneak that thing? There we go. Come in with an F wrench like this. And the reason you use the F wrench is to apply the force closer. So I can get that force where I want it to, forcing the bend to occur where I need it to. Right? So there's some thoughts about the process. We could go into so many rabbit holes on this one. This is essentially, this stuff here is how we form up top and bottom rails for railings. It's a lot of Husfeld work, it's a lot of horns and wrenches, and over the years I've, thanks to the people that I've worked with and their crazy thought processes behind it, wound up kind of using all kinds of weird tools. I'm going to show you one just entertaining stuff. But this thing here, this is actually profiled for rotational force like this, but on a cap rail. So if you've got the cap rail, you pop that into the cap rail itself, and then this comes across there, and you can create rotational force, because remember that a spiral staircase actually, it has this weird kind of helix form to it. So as it comes down, it'll try and bank out like that as you create the rotation. So you've got to pull that back down to bring that rail down. Some of the most, this is a little tiny F wrench or scrolling wrench, but sometimes you need something that is really going to apply some force, and that's what these came about because of. And these are actually more intended for creating that rotational force to break out the helix than to actually create a bend this way. It's more for this kind of flat axis type work. But yeah, build the hell out of it, build it strong. And if you notice, the pipe was flattened through here just a little bit, because if you double, you add 50% to the width, you double the strength. That's how I-beams work. So if you've got an I-beam that's 6 inches wide, it's forces, I don't know, whatever it be, but let's call it 400 pounds, right? 1 inch of deflection, 400 pounds out for a foot. If you go up to 9 inches, it will be half of that. So you basically will only get half an inch of deflection. So by adding 50% to the width, you double the strength, which is pretty interesting. Yay, physics. All right, anyway, enough nattering about all of that. I think that covers most of the basic principles. Angle of hammer, you know, if you don't get that force going right, you will find those weird kinks. Just learn them. Just make a bunch of scrolls. Just make a bunch of them. And, you know, little tiny ones. Tons and tons of little scrolls. One of my favorite exercises, I don't know if we've got one hanging on the wall. No. It's a little leaf cue chain thing that we do. Oh, some over there. And not that one, but oh, these are all the ring stuff. This one. This kind of style of idea where you're putting a little scroll on the tip and then a little pigtail. I really find that a good exercise to do, because to learn what's going on in this forming, you basically learn a lot about scrolls. So learn how to make some leaves, make some pigtails, make some pretty little tails on it with little beautiful scrolls. It's not actually my favorite, but it's pretty funky. Ooh, go have a look at my keys, Jess, and then we'll cut it off at that. They're hanging up on the post. Is that one, if I remember right, is kind of nice.
We'll find out.
Hey, might be art.
Oh, goodness.
Oh yeah, that's a weird one, that one. That was not what I was thinking. Anyway. Go play with it. That's fun. Scrolls. What I was actually talking about. So yeah. You get to do a fun little leaf, which is set downs, spreading, chiseling, whatever else you want to do, forming, and then a little bit of scrolling. And, you know, yes, that's not really a scroll, but it is scrolling. It's the same techniques and processes.
Yeah, it's kind of fun because you have a dog leg and then this bit of a scroll and then back again. So
I think that this, personally, making a little leaf with a little kind of scrolly tail on it is a really good exercise. It covers so much. You know, when you get into the leaf itself, you can do so many different things. You know, a lot of forming and shaping and chasing and chiseling and kind of getting crazy with it. So, yeah, go make some, learn some stuff.